Hello, welcome to Image Bearers. My name is Otoma Edje. We are now up to season 3. This is episode 6. Have just a great opportunity today in our family history series. This is the third interview that we're going through. So far, I've had a chance to interview Roger Lamb and then also Steve Johnson. And today we're interviewing Gordon Ferguson, who is just an awesome brother. I pray that all of our hearts can be as soft as Gordon's, as we get older in life. He has written numerous books on countless subjects. And the actual book we wanted to cover today was written in 2016, which is My Three Lives. And we're basically going to go through and look at, just have him share a little about his life story from the different, he kind of calls them really movements, up until now. So the first part of his book is called An Odd Church of Christ and My Riotous Living. That's kind of his childhood, if you will. The second part of the book is the Mainline Church of Christ and My Legalism. So kind of when he became a disciple and just some different lessons there. And then the third part of the book, which is his third movement, if you will, is the discipling movement and my wildest adventure, which is where he is currently, having his wildest adventure. So again, we have with us today Roger Lamb, who has been assisting me greatly with some heavy lifting with some interviews I've been doing from time to time. So I definitely appreciate that. So we're gonna go ahead and kick it off. You wanna start us out, Mr. Roger, with the questions?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, brother. It's joy to do this with you, and I'm so glad that we're capturing the insights from these pioneers in the faith. And this guy is one of my heroes, so it's a joy to be able to be with you with him. Gordon, we share a lot of similar background, and so I'm very eager to hear what you have to share here today. Could you please share about your childhood, the spiritual weirdness you referred to, and the impact your parents had on your life?
Okay, it's good to be with you two brothers. And I always enjoy talking about history. I'm a storyteller. And I guess that's a part of my nature, but maybe my age. I think old guys like to tell stories, and I certainly do. At any rate, I was raised, my mom and dad were very interesting people, characters to be sure. My mother was involved in a group called the Church of Christ. It's very different than what most people have seen. I'll explain that in a moment. My dad was pretty much a pagan. How they got together, I never did find out. I wish I had asked more questions. It was intriguing because my father wasn't spiritual, nor was his family at all when all of this started. But he married my mother, and he eventually started going to church with her and got somewhat involved. He never really kicked in until I did. And once I really kicked in, that affected him a lot. And then toward the latter part of his life, he definitely got much more spiritual. And the same person that influenced me a lot picked up with my dad and influenced him a lot as well. So at any rate, it got better as the years went by. This little church that we were in, there are many different groups within the family of the Church of Christ or the Churches of Christ. They follow what I call a pattern theology, in which they try to pattern themselves after the early church. And of course, there are some very unusual things that people have done. The early church, a lot of times Jesus and his disciples met in an upper room. Sometimes Paul met in an upper room. I have known of churches that literally built a house on stilts so they could imitate that and meet in an upper room. So some of the extremes they went to are more than odd. But at any rate, the group I was in felt like it was wrong to have Sunday school because the Bible always mentions the church being together. And then they felt like you had to use one cup for communion because it says Jesus took the cup. And so they were one cuppers. I was thinking this morning about that question, what would they do in this pandemic? I remember a well-known preacher in the Churches of Christ when I was a younger preacher named Marvin Phillips, great speaker, one of my favorites. But I think he told about being in one of those churches or being a part of it or knowing about it. And he said they were one cuppers until Uncle John got TB, and then they became a 2-cup church. And I expect it would be an interesting sight today. But at any rate, there are many different little groups. Well, our group had about 20 people in it. And we didn't, of course, have a full-time preacher. We had a good-hearted guy that spoke most of the time, but he was not a good speaker. I had no other people my age in this group. It was a very odd little group to me, and I didn't want any part of it. My mother's side was the religious side, but they were kind of strange religion. Some of them were strange as individuals. Not that my dad's side weren't, but they were just strange in a different way, a religious way. My dad's side, they were the ones that had all the fun. They were the pagan guys, you know, and so all the drinking and partying and all of that, well, it didn't take me long to figure that out. I'm a Ferguson. I'm going to be on my dad's side here. And so I grew up quite rebellious, turned off by church. That said, I wrote another book last year, besides one that you interviewed me on earlier, Otoma. And the book is The Power of Spiritual Relationships. And I talk about my mom and dad. And so in spite of the negatives that were there, mom believed the Bible was the inspired word of God. She had a legalistic view of it. She had a fearful view of it. When she talked about people dying or about us facing judgment, it was never safe in the arms of Jesus. It was always, and there was a song to this effect, there's an all-seeing eye watching you. There actually is that song. I can sing it, but won't right now. And so I was raised in a setting where I had the wrong view of God, but I had the view of the Bible that it was inspired. And I'm very grateful to my mother for that. And I said so at her funeral. I'm very grateful for that. And that conviction has never left me. I've done a lot of study on the topic. Dad, on the other hand, in his early years when he was very harsh, he also, though, taught me a lesson I wouldn't trade, several. One was hard work. He was a construction guy, a bricklayer. He got me a job after I got out of the 9th grade, and I worked 8 summers in a row in construction jobs that were really hard. And I was the only white guy among the common laborers. All the rest were black. And that turned out to be a great blessing to me, and why I can write about race. And I'm so freewheeling with people of color, because I worked 8 summers in a row with all black guys. So my dad taught me the value of hard work, therefore the value of money. And he also taught me to be honest. He said, boy, even if I have to wear you out, you better tell the truth. And so I did. I told him the truth, even though I got a whipping with his big belt afterwards. He drilled that into me. And so my no nonsense, blunt, sometimes to a fault way, which most people appreciate, by the way, they at least think you're honest. I owe a lot of that to my dad when I was growing up. So I got some really good things, but the religious side was a turnoff. And so in my teen years, I was partying and rebellious toward religious stuff and wanted no part of it.
Wow, that is cool. Appreciate your respect for them, and we all have good things, right? That we've brought, and then getting older and being willing and able to acknowledge the shortcomings,
right?
And we can teach our kids how to show grace to their parents.
We need
the second part of your book's on the mainline Church of Christ and your legalism. And in this era, I think is when you share about you and Theresa meeting. Mm-hmm. How did you guys meet, and what impact has she had on your spiritual life?
Well, when Theresa and I met, we actually met in the 7th grade, junior high school. Oh. We were both band kids. And so we were in band together and all of that, but we didn't like each other. In fact, quite the opposite. But when we were seniors in high school, I was an officer in the ROTC, and we elected sponsors for each of the officers, and she was elected to be a sponsor in my particular company that I was company commander of. And boy, she looked really, really good in that sponsor's summer uniform that fall. And somehow something clicked in there, and we started dating, and it was amazing. I mean, I honestly felt like within a couple of months of going out with her, I felt like, no question, I will marry this woman. And I did. Now, we had some rocky ways en route because it was a good while later in our senior year in college when we got married. But it was definitely quite a love affair, and still is. We just celebrated our 56th anniversary, and we are much in love, and we're fine being quarantined together. We get along great. A bump here and there, like all have, but very few. But the thing about her, though, besides the fact she was as cute as a bug, as they say in Louisiana, besides that, she did have a love for Jesus. She was raised in a Baptist church. Her mother, I think, was the organist. She taught Sunday school, vacation Bible school. She had a love for Jesus that was genuine. Wow. And so we were oil and water on that when we got married. I didn't want to go to church. I wanted to go fishing on Sunday or hunting. My wife wanted to go to church. And so my joke is, and it's actually not a joke, it's true, but my mother dragged me to church every week. Theresa wasn't as good. She only got me there about once every 3 weeks. But it was in that process that I finally got hooked up with a guy that was a very different drink of water, so to speak. And he did something to me. God used him in a way that was just phenomenal. And it turned me around incredibly within a couple of years, and even less. And so that's what that led to. But my wife, she was open also to restudy her whole background in the Baptist church. Theresa loves the truth. She loves Jesus. She's amazing spiritually. She's one of the most spiritual people I've ever met. And I needed her to help me get straight, and I've needed her to keep me straight, or at least as straight as I can be kept. So anyway, I'm not sure if I got to all your question there on that one. I think I did.
That's great. That's great. Anybody who knows you guys knows the huge impact she has on your life.
Absolutely.
To this day. That's right. I'm intrigued about this guy that really impacted you. What was it that he did or said that really made a difference?
Well, in the first place, most of the ministers that I had met seemed like they were kind of from another world. They weren't, I was raised in a construction family, redneck family. And so these guys seemed to me to be sort of out there and not very relatable. This other guy, we started going to this church near our house, a Church of Christ, and he was a man's man. He was 6'5" and quite a character, but just a real loving guy, funny. I mean, he just, and even when he preached, he was very different from anyone I'd ever heard. He talked about his background. He talked about his own sin. I mean, he was just so relatable. Wow. He was much more like the discipling group that I got in later in my third life. He kind of fit in. Yeah. But he asked me to take him fishing, and I had a fishing boat. He asked me to take him fishing, and boy, that was a horrible thought, to get stuck in a boat with a preacher. I mean, seriously, I was sweating bullets. And so we went out, and he was so fun. He was a great fisherman, number one. And he didn't preach at me. He could tell me I was smoking at the time and still drinking and other things, but he knew all that. I didn't hide it much. And so, but he never preached at me, but he shared a lot about his own life and about things in the Bible he was excited about. And he was a great speaker. He was really good. And so in the boat, we caught tons of fish, had a lake that had just a new lake that was full of fish. And so we just formed a bond through fishing. And here's an interesting tidbit, Roger, that you will appreciate. It was after that time, we became fishing buddies, and then he just changed my life, helped me fall in love with Jesus. I mean, it was incredible. It was a series of miracles that started with a fishing trip. Years later, and this will be especially interesting because Roger just sent a video to me and others yesterday about a meeting in Abilene we had in 2004. And in the video, we had a panel of the ICOC guys and the regular mainstream Churches of Christ guys, several on each panel. And one of the ones he showed on the Church of Christ side was a guy who's now passed, but his name was Jim Woodruff. Years later, I found out that my preacher friend, who had been wilder than me as a young guy, kicked out of his last school in Little Rock, Arkansas in the 9th grade at age 15. The principal called him in, and his mother was already there, and he walks into the principal's office, pulls out a cigarette and lights it. So that was it for him back in those days. And he was kicked out of school. But later, he actually had the same experience I had, only with Jim Woodruff. And Jim took him fishing and got to him. And then he went to Harding College and got his training there, graduated from Harding College, which is a Christian school. And so he had the same, he just practiced the same thing on me, and he didn't even tell me about it for a lot of years. So Jim and I talked about it in 2004. And he said, Gordon, he said, you and I ought to go up and get old Richard and take him fishing because he's in bad shape, about to die. But we could probably get him out to the lake. And we didn't do it. I regret that.
Yeah.
But that's sort of the story of how I got my flame lit. And once it got lit, I mean, Teresa's was just sitting there waiting for the match. And once I got lit, she was ready. And so this preacher encouraged us to go to Harding College to a Thanksgiving lectureship, except we went to a personal evangelism workshop that was held at the same time. And after that, I mean, we were done. I was looking for a way to be a preacher after that. It took a couple of years to get it figured out, but that was an amazing, amazing time.
Were you in Louisiana at the time?
Right, Shreveport, Louisiana.
And that's, you grew up in Louisiana, right?
Right, grew up in Shreveport.
And then, but what year was that when you went to that Harding lecture?
That year would have been, let's say our son was a baby. He was born in April of 68. So this would have been the fall of 1968.
Marcia and I were there as a newlywed couple.
Yeah. We went to the personal evangelism part, but then we went over and were part of the lectureship for a speech Jimmy Allen did on grace, which was a blow-away lesson if you hadn't to have had it impact you the way it did me.
Yes. His freshman class on Romans changed my whole view of God and Christianity.
Yeah. It was a great, he had a book on it, great book.
Yeah. Well, why didn't you come say hi at that thing?
Well, I had no idea who Roger and Marcia Lamb were.
We didn't either.
Yeah, I didn't know who I was.
So was it that a seminal moment when you decided you wanted to go into ministry? Or
I think it was. I mean, I'm sure I thought of it before then, but after that, we met guys that I later actually, one of them I worked with, JT Bristow. He was a speaker on that program, and many years later, I worked with him, and the book tells all about that. He was one of my best mentors.
Yep.
But on the way home from that, Theresa and I started talking about it. We've got to do it. We just didn't know how. And it took a series of miracles for that to pan out, which is in the book. It's all in the book. Quite unique story.
Yeah. So are there any memorable experiences in training to be a minister?
Well, the whole miraculous situation of us going to the school of preaching, we went to a training school. Schools of preaching were very, very popular at this point in our history. And they were designed for anyone that was a little older that wanted to preach. May not have gone to college, may have a college degree. Some guys there had a master's degree. Just anyone that wanted to change careers, and that was a good way to do it, a very intense 2-year program. Right. So I made a phone call to the director of the school. I posted some stuff on Facebook about that today, by the way, but I made a phone call to ask for a brochure because neither my preacher friend Richard or I knew anything about a preacher school, but he knew someone that had gone to one. And he said he was a really good guy. So we called him to get the number of the school he went to, which happened to be in Dallas. And I called for a brochure. And in a minute, the director of the school got on and started talking to me. And I'm thinking, hey, dude, I'm not enrolling in your school. I want a brochure. I don't know what your school is. I mean, it was incredible how pushy he was. And then he tells me, he said, I tell you what, he said, I'm going to fly over. I got a small plane. I'm going to fly over there and talk to you. And I thought, goodness, I was kind of had a sales job at the time. Theresa was a substitute teacher. She was teaching. And so I'm thinking, how am I going to tell her that this guy is going to fly over tomorrow and see us? I mean, my head is spinning. So I hang up, and Richard went back to his office at the church building. And after a while, he calls back and he said, Gordon, he said, the guy from Dallas called me back and talked to me a long time about you. And he said to call you and tell you that he's headed to the airport now, and he's flying in tonight, wants to have dinner with you and spend the night. And I thought, this is the craziest thing I've ever heard of in my life. The story is in the book. You really need to read this one. Yeah. It's off the charts, unbelievable. But at 5 o'clock that afternoon, I picked Theresa up at school where she was teaching and said, honey, you got to fix dinner. And by the way, we've got an overnight guest. Well, that was quite a shocker to her too. So I picked the dude up at the airport in Shreveport. He flew in from Dallas and he came to the house and he started talking. And all of a sudden the pieces started coming together about support. It was a full-time school, started coming together in ways that, again, all of it's mind-blowing, all the pieces of this puzzle. And about midnight, he said, okay, you can come a week late. We started today, Monday. He said, you can come a week late and start next Monday. You can stay with me until you get an apartment and then you move your family over. And he gave me the whole 9 yards. He says, so are you going to do it? And I thought a minute and I said, yes. And he looked at me and he said, are you sure? I think by then he wondered if he had oversold it, because it was. The pieces to put together were just wild.
Yeah.
And I said, yes, I'm going to do it. He looked at Theresa and said, what do you think? She said, well, he's been miserable for the last 2 years wanting to be a preacher. He's been miserable and I'm ready to see him out of his misery. So yes, he'll be there. So, it's quite the story. That book's full of stories like that, by the way.
That's awesome. So Theresa put you out of your misery, basically.
She helped put me out of my misery, and I went the next week, and many stories to follow. But
that's awesome. So that's why he was so urgent, was to get you in that rotation.
Yeah, he wanted to get me in school since it had just started.
Nice.
For that semester.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Amazing how God puts people in our paths.
Yeah.
That
2
changes
years
the trajectory.
or more of misery, less than 12 hours done.
Yeah.
From a phone call to saying yes, less than 12 hours.
Boom. Wow. That's so cool. That's so cool. So when you came into contact with the discipling movement, what led you to your third life there and being involved with the Boston Church and the ICOC?
Well, that one wasn't on my to-do list. That one was not because I was looking and anxious at all. It was just a series of events happened. That movie, Lemony Snicket, Series of Unfortunate Events. I've had a lot of situations with a series of events. Some were unfortunate, some not. Some looked unfortunate, but they were not. So what happened is I was speaking. The Churches of Christ, the mainstream group, used to have these big soul winning workshops, they called them. And I had taught on a number of them in classes. Some of the classes were small, some of them quite large. Some of the workshops were small, some quite large. But I had never done what they called a keynote address, which they usually had one of those a day, maybe two, but not too many of everyone being together. And I had a buddy that was directing a workshop in the Northwest, and I guess Portland, Oregon, or Seattle, I forget where it was. But anyway, one of my buddies I'd gone to preacher school with was directing it, so he put me in a slot to be the main speaker one night. Well, the guy that was leading the Crossroads campus ministry, Chuck Lucas, was on the program, and he heard me speak that night. And he liked what he heard, evidently. I don't know how much he really knew about me, but he liked what I said. And so then Tom Brown, who's now up in his 60s, Tom Brown was the campus minister at a church in Colorado, and Boulder, Colorado, and they had lost their pulpit guy. And so Chuck told Tom, try to get Gordon to come and be the pulpit guy there where you're leading the campus. And he'll be a great guy to train your students that you're, converting and training, because he taught in a school of preaching. I mean, he's taught at a pretty high level, so he'd be a great guy to get to come. Well, then Tom met me at a conference, that same soul winning workshop the next year, which was in Spokane. We ran into him on an elevator. And he starts talking to me about coming to Boulder and looking at the pulpit job there, et cetera. And I said, listen, I got a church in Tacoma has been trying to get me to move. If I'm going to leave Dallas, which I am not sure I am, but if I did, I'd go to Tacoma. They've been after me for a couple of years. And so he kept talking, and he really impressed my wife. She just was taken with Tom. He was a really nice young man. He was a great speaker, but Tom was a bit more mild-mannered than a lot of young leaders back in those days. And he had a way about him, still does.
Yeah.
And anyway, we started talking, and it ended up that I didn't want to go there, but he persuaded me to send 3 tapes on cassette, sermons that his elders could listen to. And I said, Tom, I'm not interested in coming if I leave Dallas. But he kept on. So I said, okay, well, here are the 3 tapes. And I sent them. Well, one of the elders, on hearing one of the 3, they were varied in the type message they were, but one was very strong about the need to evangelize. And it had edge on it. However, I was asked to preach it in many places in the mainline churches of Christ. I mean, it wasn't overly shocking, but this one elder there heard it, and he said, that's it, he's off the table. And so I think Tom felt bad about that, but I didn't. I wasn't really interested in going anyway, but I think Tom felt bad for me. And so sort of as a consolation prize, he asked me to speak on the 1981 Rocky Mountain Evangelism Seminar at Estes Park, Colorado. Yeah. And so I was one of the main speakers there. They had about, I think, 8 different guys or so that spoke and did speeches to the whole group. But there were, I don't know, 1,000, 2,000, I don't know, pretty good crowd there. Yeah. But I was fairly well known, even as a young guy in the mainline churches of Christ, but I didn't know anyone in the discipling group, the campus ministry group. No one knew me. And I was the next to the last speaker. I do remember that. And all these guys were looking at their programs and saying, Gordon Ferguson, who in the world is that? So they helped my insecurities go through the roof, but which bothered me, by the way. I even talked to people about that later. There's a backstory of that one as well. But after I spoke, then everyone wanted to talk to me. And that's when I met so many of the key players in the discipling movement. And from there, even though I had agreed to move to Tacoma by then, and I did a few months later in June of 81, even though I'd agreed to do that, for the next 4 years that I was in Tacoma, I was invited to speak in a lot of places where they had campus ministries, discipling ministries. So I knew all the guys. And the more I got to know them, I had to sift through all the criticisms that I was hearing. I read stuff and listened to tapes and heard all the critics and all of that. But they did not dissuade me from what I saw with my own eyes. And so after 4 years, I just said, okay, I can't change the environment in this church. I'm done. And then the next day I get a call from one of the elders in San Diego. And from there, we moved to San Diego in June of 85. And that was it. Boston 2.5 years later, and 16 years there, and on and on. So
I got to stay in your house in San Diego.
Right.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah, we had the Blau stayed with us on the one suitcase challenge trip. Their last night in America before they went to India was in our house. I helped carry those suitcases down my stairs. They were really big. But the one suitcase challenge, that originated with them, and I got to be the last part of that, getting them to the airport.
And then why did you move to Boston?
Wow. Well, there was definitely a move by the Boston elders and by Kip McKean to get people to move to Boston. And there were two reasons given. One is you need more training, even though the church in San Diego was growing like crazy. We were baptizing hundreds of people, literally. But you need more training. And then it was an attempt to unify the different pieces of the campus ministries and all of that into one movement. So they asked us to come to Boston and meet with them about that. There were certain guys that had already moved there. When did you move, Roger?
88.
Yeah, okay, so you and I about the same time. But prior to that, Tom Brown had moved there. Bruce Williams had moved there. There were others that had preceded us. But our two elders and co-evangelist Greg Marutsky, we went and met for about 3 days with Kip and Bob and Al, the two elders at the time. And we met, and, you know, the elders were saying, listen, we had a crossroads trained guy before Gordon, and Gordon has done far more since he got there. So why do we need to have him come here for more training? And so it was an intense conversation, and the elders were resistant, but at some point, I don't know, something clicked, and maybe I got tired and wore out, but I finally said, okay, let's stop it right here. I'll come. Well, the elders weren't real happy with that decision because I made it right there in front of them. But I said, okay, I'll come. But not just anybody can take my place. And Marutsky said he'll come. And so we started then switching and talking about who's going to take my place or our place in San Diego. And that was another long discussion. And so Kip began by saying, okay, I'll throw out who I think ought to come. He said, you may throw me and my idea out the window. And we did, actually. We threw several suggestions out the window, but Tom Brown was in that meeting, and he had Bruce Williams with him, since Bruce was going to accompany him to Los Angeles, supposedly. But finally, we ran out of names, and Kip said, what about Bruce here? And all of us looked at Bruce and we said, Yeah, that's a better idea. We can talk on that one. And so that ended up being the case. Bruce went there as the lead evangelist after we left. And we didn't leave immediately. That was, I forget when that was, but Greg left at the end of 1980. Let's see, he left, I think, in the summer of 87. And then we left we stayed there to lead. And then we left the last few days of 87 in December. So we were there to start in Boston the beginning of 88 and stayed exactly within a few days of 16 years.
Would you mind sharing some about your relationship with Wyndham and the eldership in Boston and just how that all?
Yeah, Wyndham and Jeannie discipled Theresa and me, and I definitely talk a lot about it in that book. Plus, I wrote a book at the beginning of this year called The Power of Spiritual Relationships. It is dedicated to Wyndham and Jeannie because Wyndham had just died when I wrote the book. I have 2 chapters about Wyndham and our relationship, and there's I think they're 2 great chapters about 2 of the finest people I've ever known in my life. Yeah. And so Wyndham and Jeannie discipled us when we first got there, and they were. I don't know if I don't think I could have made it without them. I think there were things that I saw I didn't like that I would have blown the fort up without Wyndham to talk me off the edge, and he kept doing that the rest of his life. I flew from Phoenix to Boston to get with Wyndham to get him to talk me off of another edge. I always find some edge to be on, But amazing relationship with them. And then, although I supposedly needed more training and didn't know what I was doing, the elders in Boston, Gempels and Bairds were the 2 couples. They had me deal with some heavy duty situations immediately after moving to Boston. And I think in working with them in counseling some really serious situations, they decided I should be an elder. And I'd already been targeted to plant the church in Dallas, so I didn't want to be an elder. And when Kip talked to me, I still remember it well. I said, man, I don't want to be an elder. I'd had too many troubles with elders in the mainline Church of Christ. I didn't want to be one of those guys. I said, I don't want to be an elder. I want to be an evangelist, lead the church to Dallas. And Kip said, well, he said, you can be an elder for a year and then lead the church to Dallas. That's one of those things as you are thinking about it, you're thinking, wait a minute, something wrong with that picture. And sure enough, that's right. I got appointed an elder with Bob and Al. And then a few days before the conference where we were recruiting the final ones to go to Dallas, I mean, I'd made trips and preached in Dallas, so we were coming. And they pulled the plug on that thing. Kip and the elders pulled the plug on it, said, you're more important as an elder in Boston than you are leading a church to Dallas. And that was about a 1-year period of grief. That broke my heart.
Yeah.
Kip said one time, Kip said a lot of things that are really good. He said some things that weren't good, but he said a lot of things that were good. But he said one time, the kingdom is built on dreams. And then after a pregnant pause, he said, broken dreams. And that was true in my case. That was a broken dream.
Yeah.
But in looking back at it, I think it was the thing to do, God's will. I would have never written books had I not gone there. I would not be on this interview today. So it was a big turning point there, but that's how I got involved. But Wyndham and I, Bob and Pat moved to Philadelphia to lead Hope. And then that was me and Al being elders. And then Al decides to move to LA to be with the church there. And so we're about to lose the eldership, and we appointed Wyndham at a young age. I mean, he was a young guy, he's in his 30s when he got appointed. And there were questions about him being appointed that young with his children as young as they were. Only one had been baptized at that point. But Wyndham, of course, from the start was a great
Yeah.
elder because he
Right.
always had a shepherd's heart and a tremendous amount of wisdom. And so he and I became the elders and remained fellow elders until I moved to Phoenix in
Right.
the end of 2003.
And then you guys wrote that book together, Golden Rule Leadership,
Golden Rule
that had
Leadership.
a huge impact
Yeah.
in the movement. Would you mind
Right.
sharing about that?
Well, I went to Tom Jones, who was at that time, he was also another one of my dearest friends in life. He was editor of DPI, which was a reasonably new organization back in those days. But I had written several books, and I went to Tom. I had written a lot of books by then, actually, but I went to Tom and I said, I've got a lot of stuff on leadership that I think our movement needs. And I want to write a book on leadership. What do you think? And he said, yeah, I think that's a great idea. He said, what do you think about writing it with Wyndham? Because he's got a lot of good ideas on leadership as well. And I said, great, that'd be wonderful. We're best friends. That'd be wonderful. And so I talked to Wyndham, and of course he jumped on it. And we wrote that book together. We each wrote different chapters of it, but we went away to a friend's house in Maine on a lake and did a lot of writing together for some days and praying and just enjoying. We both were outdoorsy guys and just had a beautiful time together. But it was a great thing to do together. And I think the book was a great product. Not everyone thought that in the beginning.
Actually, it was banned in one of our bigger churches.
Two
Sorry.
big ones. And I don't know about the others.
Can you synthesize what was the main impact that book had on our leadership?
Well, basically in the book, I mean, we talked a lot about dynamics of leadership and servant leadership and leading the way Jesus led and not lording it over people. We tried to correct a lot of the excesses that were going on. But the thing that really chafed people, some, not many, most people loved it.
Yeah.
But what really bothered some of the top tier leaders was the idea of team leadership.
Yeah.
We just felt like a team could come up with more wisdom than any one individual, and that we needed to learn to lead as a team, which Wyndham and I had been doing. I mean, Wyndham was a big Hope leader. He led the Hope team. I mean, I was a part of the team in Boston, the leadership team. I mean, we knew how to lead a team. And so to us, it was just, I had tons of experience doing it. So did he. But it was not a popular concept in its infancy in our movement at that time.
Yeah. Well, and the Boston church, honestly, is a testimony to the wisdom of that change, that paradigm. It's one of the reasons it's so solid, stable, and still moving forward.
Right.
So thank you.
Okay,
guys.
back to my three lives.
Yes.
Do Golden Rule Leadership some other time. Back to my three lives. Otoma, you got something you want to ask there?
Yeah, so I think in reading your book, I think it's on page 125 or so, you basically go through and catalog some of the different issues that the church had, as far as like the low spiritual growth and so forth. Can you share about some of the specifics that you found in your research?
Numerical growth. I listed on page 125, which not everyone appreciated. My view is that we were a movement that had been built on focus on the Great Commission and converting the world. It was our dream. And so my feeling was that I needed to let people know that didn't know that we are not growing much. And in early days, we grew a lot. Of course, we also, as the years went by, had almost as many going out the back doors we had coming in the front door because the principles of Golden Rule leadership were not followed. But at any rate, I just felt like people needed to know. The leaders knew, but I felt like the people need to know. And so I put that in the book. The general reaction to the book on that and other things was actually quite good. It especially resonated with young people. I was kind of shocked because I quoted a campus student and some of his concerns, and my letter my email exchange with him, I put that in the book, and it really resonated with younger people. It also resonated with a lot of older people that were concerned about the lack of growth. And so I mentioned, I think in that first year, that had been 2016, that in 2015, our growth had been like just under 2% as a movement. And there were other statistics that were alarming also. Since that time, we haven't improved. We've actually gone down a little. And so that was very concerning. And I felt like that needs to be out there, because at one time we were motivated a lot by growth, not always in a good way. Our motivation for growing was not always done in a good way at all. But the
Right.
concept of reaching as many as possible and changing the world, that was a dream that I felt like needed to be revived. And I still think it needs to be revived. At this moment, my greater concern is not the numbers per se. It is kind of the stuff that is behind the numbers. And so my concern now is that we have, this is going to sound weird, we have a lot of older members, maybe younger ones too, that are not motivated by numbers or the lack of growth. I think they have settled in and gotten too comfortable with the status quo. You know, you only have something that's new for a while, and then it becomes the new normal. This crazy pandemic, I mean, we got a new normal with that I don't like much, but I've gotten used to it. I'm doing a lot better with it than I was doing 6 months ago. I think we get acclimated to it. So I'm concerned that we don't have the same zeal for evangelism that we once had. We hadn't all lost it. We hadn't lost it altogether, and individuals haven't lost it at all. There are certainly people that are highly evangelistic, and we still are concerned about growth. It's just not the driving force that it once was, and of course that is concerning. My concern, I've got two concerns. One is that I think too many of us that are older have gotten used to the status quo as it is and aren't as disturbed and motivated as we need to be by the Great Commission and the lostness of the world. If we really believe that the way is narrow and the gate is narrow, and only a few are on that way, and most of the world therefore is lost, if we really believe that, we ought to be doing a lot more than we're doing. The last interview you did with me, Otoma, was on my little book, God, Are We Good? I wrote that to try to help fire us up about doing more. I wrote it so that we could give it to our friends. I have mailed it out to cousins and friends that I haven't seen in decades and gotten some response back and have communication going. And I'm teaching it on midweeks. It's online, 4 lessons in the Northeast region of the Dallas church. I'm teaching 4 lessons on that because our leader, Derek Vett, felt like, wow, this can help our members to just have more convictions about basics and to know how to share. And so the book was written with an idea of let's just talk together. It's not an edgy book. It's a book that just tries to reason with people and get them to think through basics. But I've sent it to lots of people, and I'll send it to a lot more. But I want to get us more like that and not just satisfied with the status quo. It's got to be more than simply a nice little church and our nice little friends at church. It's got to be more than that. There's got to be a motivation to change the world. And that brings me to my second point of concern, and that is about our young people. Our young people, they are looking for a dream. Young people always do. That's what got me. I mean, I was in my early 20s when all this started for me. I was looking for a dream. I was willing to do anything. I give it all up. I'll say yes after 12 hours. Yeah, I'll sell my house. Yeah, I'll move away from my family. Yeah, I'll do all of that stuff. I'll stay in your house. I'll find an apartment somewhere. You know, you do radical things. And so actually, I just have an article in that book, The Power of Relationships. I just posted the last chapter in that book on Facebook today. That's entitled "My Hope is in Our Youth," and I address some things there that I think are very direct, but I think very needed for old and young alike to get hold of. But our youth are looking for a dream. That's one thing. The other thing is they feel like we as a church have lost our relatability to the current society, especially younger people. And they are very concerned about that one. And I talk to people like Nadine Templer, like I did last night, and she says, Gordon, we've got a huge problem with our young people. Some of our most committed, some of the ones that she works with Hope Youth Corps. And so she has raised the flag. I think you've interviewed her before, but she does not beat around the bush about her concern. I've talked to Michael Burns. I've talked to Dave Malutnock. Last several days, they are concerned about the same thing. And so I'm trying to beat on that drum and help our young people know that, hey, we're missing some things, but we're willing to learn, and we're willing to learn from you. And we want it to be different and better. And we want your experience to be like ours was when we were your age. We want you to see a world being changed by the commitment that you are making to Jesus in carrying out the Great Commission. And so those are my bigger concerns. Right now, statistics don't motivate people much, because the ones that motivates, the ones that need to be motivated aren't motivated by it. They've gotten too comfortable, in my judgment. There are others that are already motivated because they can see that we've gotten too comfortable. So I haven't used statistics in a while. I have them, I can use them, but at this point, I don't think they motivate. Maybe in 2016, it motivated more. But right now, I'm just going to say we're not growing hardly at all. I've heard many other leaders say we're stuck. We've got to find ways to get unstuck. Amen. And we do. And we're all in it together. We got to help each other. We got different ways of doing it. I'm the guy that is going to be the edgy guy. I'm the guy that's going to write a book or an article that's going to tick some people off, especially older leaders. Golden Rule Leadership did that. Some things about My Three Lives did that. Some of what I write in the future, I'm sure will do that. But you got to have some guys like me. Roger, on the other hand, interesting that he's in the group today. Roger has an incredible, unusual gift. He's the good news guy. He's been it for years. He was the Kingdom News Network guy. They posted all of those on the Disciples Today YouTube channel. They're all available from all of those years, including the little excerpt that he sent me yesterday that stirred my memories up and caused me to write some stuff last night and today again. But Roger, you know, when all of the calamity struck that slowed us down, Roger, you know, got into the Disciples Today, and man, he was peddling that like a door-to-door salesman. He had no shame at all. He was begging because he felt like we got to show people good news. And that's Roger's gift. You know, I'm the guy. I think my gift is to point out, hey, here's something we better pay attention to, guys. This is serious business. And in the long run, it's going to hurt us. That's my gift. Roger's gift is good news. And no one can do it like him. He's phenomenal at it. And we all must be indebted to him for what he has done and what he is helping carry on. I was on the, he's got so many gifts that tie into what he's done with media. I was on the diversity group, the squad as we're now calling it for our movement. I was on that for several years, but we had two other white guys on it. And I felt like, well, three's enough. When Roger doesn't know this, but we were doing some Zoom conferences and all of that. And Roger was the guy that had to help us. He's the media guy. He knows how to do all this stuff. But Roger's also really good with a lot of convictions on the racial issue. And so he was getting involved in it and speaking up in the group and all of that. And even though he wasn't an official member of it, he was a part of it and a very important part. And at that point, I thought, okay, we still got 3 white guys, and that's enough for that group. In my judgment, given the size of the group, I backed out because Roger was involved. I never told him that, but that was one of the main things that I felt like I could back out, because I think Roger has as much to contribute on the racial side as I do. Plus, he's a media guy and knows how to do that a lot better than I ever will know how to do. So anyway, I think since he's on the call, I want to point out an important thing, and that is we don't all think alike. If we're going to have unity, it's going to have to be unity and diversity, and unity without uniformity. We've got to agree on the fundamentals, but there's got to be room in our movement for having different views on some areas that fall into the opinion realm. And we also have different gifts. And I think Roger and I, we're 2 of the old guys in the movement. I'm older than Roger, but not by much. But I'm older than Roger. But so we're the old school guys, but we have different gifts that complement each other and that I think are a benefit to the movement as a whole. But I say all of that to say that I'm always going to be speaking about things that concern me. That doesn't mean that I don't love the church and wouldn't die for it. I love the church. I got kids, grandkids, spiritual kids and grandkids by the bukus in this church. I love the church, and that's why I do speak out. But I love what Roger does with his set of gifts, because no one does it like him. And I love his stuff. He caused me to spend.
You're being very, very kind. But this is about you. This isn't about me.
Well, but I got to say it here. We're together. And I got to say it because our people, this is a lesson about history, about family, and about our history. And the way you play into it is important, and people need to be totally aware of what you bring to the table and the resources they can access. So anyway, I don't know how much time you've got here or how long we're going to go, but I'll stop and you can ask something else if you want to, or you can just say amen and pray. I don't care.
I want to thank
we got one question, and then Roger's going to say a few words. So I know, as you mentioned, Gordon, that you are someone I think is correct, that who basically speaks the truth. You see an issue, you really try to go after, trying to help people see what it is to really help the churches to be healthy. So I guess just real quick, if you can maybe just briefly share about how you feel. You kind of shared a little bit about how you feel our churches are doing, but what are some of the things that you feel our churches need to do to be healthy?
Well, I do think that we've got to be careful about actually condoning the development of a bigger and bigger fringe. And by fringe, I mean people that are recognized as members of a congregation that really are very little involved. Because when a fringe gets to a certain size, then they will influence even the new members that come in, and the new members might be totally fired up. But whatever the group as a whole, whatever that personality is, and I've written about that, I'm sure, and done lessons about it, etc. But when the core becomes smaller and the fringe becomes bigger, then the group all groups have a personality. And so then, as the fringe gets larger, even when you bring new converts in, they will eventually tend to absorb what the overall personality and persona of the group is. So that is a concern. So I think there we've got to be more on top of having clear expectations of what it means to be a disciple and therefore a member of this congregation, whichever it is. We've got to have some structure that helps us with that. And we've got to have some accountability done correctly, not lording it over people, not being harsh, none of that, just loving and concerned like you would be with your own family when they're not involved or doing well. With Golden Rule leadership, we've got to help people get back on track that have drifted out into the fringe. So that is a concern. And I've been saying this for a long time. Any group has to have expectations. They have to have some structure to actually direct those expectations. And then you've got to have some accountability to make sure the expectations are there so that it's all working. And so we did some of that in the wrong way, but we can't throw out the baby with the bathwater. We've got to do it in a Jesus type way. He did. The early church had all of this, but that to me is what's big, is to try to help people get back to what does it really mean to be a disciple? Because that's where it is. It's not saying, well, here's how it needs to be in our church. No, what does a disciple of Jesus need to be? And if we get that right, the church will be what it needs to be. It's not about the church; it's about Jesus.
That's right.
And the church is his body, his kingdom, his witness to the world. But if we are his witness to the world, and I taught that lesson last night in the midweek about us being the kingdom, the fullness of Christ, the diverse body that's joined together like Jews and Gentiles in Ephesians 3. Really good lesson last night on what the church needs to be as a witness to the world to attract them. We've got to have unity, and we've got to have love like Jesus had. It's all about that. He says that's how the world's going to know you're my disciples. So if we have that, the church will be what it needs to be. It's not trying to fix the church. It's trying to fix people to be the church, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. We're going to go ahead and wrap it up here. I definitely appreciate everything you've shared. Right before we started, I kind of showed some of these blasts from the past. Kids, this is what cassettes used to come in when you buy a lot of them, okay? Not MP3s and all that stuff. So these
Turn it around and show the 4 cassettes.
Yeah. So these are
yeah, the cassettes are stuck in the back.
These are actually some great lessons that Gordon Ferguson gave to me many years ago when I was in Boston. So this one is God and History. This one is The Radical Edge, the lesson of the minor prophets. This one is My Nine Have Seen the Glory on Revelation. This one is on the Holy Spirit. So this is back, when we were really cool back then. We had Walkmans, and you could put, a few of those cassettes in, one at a time and listen to them. But I've always appreciated just your heart, Gordon, and just everything you've done. We're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Roger's going to say a few words. He's actually going to close this out. But I just want to say before we go to that is, those of you that enjoyed this episode, definitely click like and subscribe for more great episodes. I will try to get more, family history that we'll be posting on this channel as time goes. Take it away, Roger.
Well, one thing.
Yes.
All of those cassette sets that he showed you, that's all on DVD or CD available from IPI Books. So it's just in a different format that you can access now. But I have 16 audio or audio visual series, including all the ones he showed you. They're all still available.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Some are downloadable too, I believe.
Yeah.
That's awesome. This has been a real privilege for me. Thank you, Otoma, for this podcast. It's had a great impact. I refer people to it all the time. And it's just a thrill for me to get to spend this time with Gordon, going through his life. A segment of it. I hope this has intrigued you to read his book and see more of the details. He's a great storyteller, and he has a great story to tell. And this is exciting. I appreciate your convictions, Gordon. You've always been a man of conviction and great integrity, and humbly applying it to yourself first. And I've really tried to learn from you in that over the years, and really appreciate that. And I think we got to keep speaking the truth about things, visions, and dreams God's putting on our hearts. So may we never get too old to dream
Right.
new dreams and see new things. And thank you for your honesty there. Let's thank God here together. Father, thank you so much for just loving us, and Gordon's life. It just reminds each of us how you had to pick us up out of our own pits and wash us off in the blood of Jesus, and put us into your kingdom. Just nothing that we deserve at all, but by your love and your grace, and by the death, burial, resurrection of Jesus. Thank you so much for weaving our lives together. Thank you for the incredible purpose that you give us and the mission that you give us. Thank you for all the wonderful things we have seen, Father. And thank you for helping us learn from the mistakes that we made. Help us make new mistakes, learn from the old ones, but help us to have that zeal, to be willing to go and try new things. And Father, there's so much of a world left to be reached. And I know that was the dream that captured us and still captures us. And we pray that it will capture your people forever. Help us to be a part, however we can, to get the gospel to the billions of people still waiting to hear about you. We love you. Thank you for Gordon and Theresa and their lives and the blessings they've been to people all over the world. Continue to bless their health. Bless him as he continues to write and speak. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you, everyone.